Hello, everybody. I'm Anthony Gonzalez, and I'm the program coordinator for the Higher Education Center for Alcohol and Drug Misuse Prevention and Recovery. I want to welcome you all today to our webinar titled Finding Common Ground, the Intersection of Student Development Theory and Recovery Support, featuring Ahmed Hosni and Mackenzie Hogan. Before we get started in today's content, I do just have a couple of slides I'd like to share with everyone. Here on the screen should look somewhat familiar as we are in the Zoom webinar format. We do welcome our participants' questions for our panelists at any time throughout the live session. Please put your specific questions in the Q&A box so we do not miss them. We do have the chat enabled, but please use that to share your reflections of the presented content as well as any resources as well. But please put your specific questions in the Q&A box. Additionally, we have live captioning available for today. You should be able to set that up through your bottom dashboard. If you have any issues getting that set up, please send me a direct message via chat and I will help you through that process. We encourage everybody to learn more about becoming a member of the Higher Education Center. You can learn more about the different membership tiers and the benefits that go along with them by visiting our website at hecaod.osu.edu. We have a free webinar happening next month on October 12th from 2 to 3 o'clock featuring Dr. Emily Baker and is titled Beyond the Aggregate, Amplifying Voices from the 2022 College Prescription Drug Study. And with that, it is my great pleasure to turn it over to our presenters today, Ahmed Hosni and Mackenzie Hogan. Thank you again for joining us.
All right. I am technologically challenged. Give me 1 second as I figure all this out. There we go. We good to go? Can you see it, Mackenzie? All right, cool. Awesome. Welcome. Thank you all for being here. Finding Common Ground, the intersections of student development theory and recovery support. Mackenzie and I would like to welcome you into a conversation we've been having for many years as we've worked together, thinking about holistic approaches to collegiate recovery work, right? This idea that when a student walks through our doors, we have a duty to support their entire self, not just the one that is struggling with substance misuse and those concerns specifically, right? So how do we take a holistic approach to supporting students, and what theories are going to drive us in that work? And so my name is Ahmed Hosni. I use he, him pronouns. I'm an assistant director at the Student Wellness Center here at Ohio State University. I'm the director of recovery at the Higher Education Center, where I get to work closely with Anthony and Logan and all the wonderful people that you all know so well. And I am excited to be co-presenting with my colleague, who I will allow to introduce themselves.
Yes, absolutely. So my name is Mackenzie Hogan. I use she, her pronouns. I am the wellness coordinator for our Collegiate Recovery Community here at Ohio State. My background is in student affairs, which is why I think this has been a conversation in which Ahmed and I have been having often, and excited to kind of share a little bit about it with you. There we go. So like Ahmed said, I think our hope here today is, we're kind of going through this and we had an idea of what this presentation would be, and it's kind of morphed a little bit, but ultimately what we're hoping to kind of share with you today is a little bit of like just describing the foundations of what student development theory is, as well as the foundations of collegiate recovery research, right? Because I think when we have an idea of the history and some of these foundational pieces, it helps us to frame where we've been and where we could go. I think secondly, we want to be able to, find where some of that synergy and overlap is when we're supporting students, and particularly students in recovery, and then discuss with participants the unique approaches that are happening here at Ohio State, but happening across the country, and kind of give you a little bit of detail about maybe our process and how we've approached this idea of like theory to practice in our work. So to start off, we wanted to give kind of like a brief highlight of what is student affairs as a whole. So, I think any individual who works in a college campus can identify as being someone who does student affairs work, right? If you're working with students. But the profession has really changed a lot from the beginning. So, I'm kind of like a history geek. So I think like thinking about this progression really takes a look at like where we are and where we're going. So, colleges have been around for a very, very long time. And if we think about when colleges started, what they looked like, who was going to colleges, who colleges were made for, right? So we know that in this colonial era time, there was this idea of in loco parentis, and what that really meant was like taking the place of the parent. And so student affairs as its own division didn't really exist. It was mostly faculty members who really took on the role of supporting and developing students, right? So they were doing the classroom stuff, but doing everything else because these individuals were leaving their home environment and coming to learn. And often it took on like a disciplinary role. So truly being like a parent at that time. By the time we hit the mid 1800s, things started to change a bit. I think students began to maybe feel like that it was a little overbearing, and faculty began feeling like their roles really had to be exclusive to training and research and working with graduate students. And so a lot of that like parental roles fell to the wayside. In about the 1890s, we start seeing what really becomes the foundation of maybe some student affairs positions. And kind of what's happening in the world at that time is that instead of it just being cis white men going to school, we're also seeing women start to find their way into higher education. And so this idea of having a dean of women who was a faculty member, but was really there to support the unique needs of women on campuses became a thing. And, once you had a dean of women, it started thinking about a dean of men and things of that nature. And that leads us to about the 1930s, right? And so there's a seminal document called the Student Personnel Point of View, which really is a landmark report that emphasized this idea of, college not being just about the intellectual side, but really the whole student, and thinking holistically about the individual experience and recognizing that every student is going to be unique and different, and there's going to be different needs of each person, right? And so this is where we start seeing the division of different like sectors of student affairs. There's, I think, if you look at like ACPA and NASPA, which is some of our higher ed spaces, there's about 30 different functional areas that exist now. Then we hit like the 1960s and again, a little bit more of a shift there, right? So up until this point, a lot of what student affairs was acting in that like parental role, a lot more about conduct and discipline and making sure that students are making decisions based on that and like how they're supposed to be acting. 1960s is where a couple different like legal cases were going through. I think it was Alabama, but don't quote me, about what the legal age of adulthood being 18 is. And because of that, there was a lot more conversation happening about the different relationship between students and universities in their collegiate spaces, right? And so what we ended up seeing is there's a shift there from student affairs as a space being about that disciplinary piece and more about being about educating around choices and decisions and supporting the educational learning of the full student. And then through the 90s, 1970s to 1990s, we're seeing a lot more professionalization. This is kind of the space where we're not as separate of like there's faculty in the intellectual side of things, and then there's the student affairs side of things, but instead seeing a lot of the collaboration that are happening in this understanding that in order for a student to be in our space and to learn and be the best versions of themselves in their classroom, they're going to need the support of folks that are outside the classroom and helping the students along their journey from anywhere from, wellness to admissions to student organizations, things of that nature. And really is that match, like the time in which this work really started to mature. And I think today, when I think about where student affairs is, it's really about examining all these theories that we've come up in the last, 200 years, something like that, to really be thinking about how are we re-examining what we see as theory and knowledge, and really using justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion to make sure that we are using theoretical knowledge that is encompassing of who's going to college today, and not just who was going to college in the 1800s, right? Because it's a very, very different population of students.
Yeah, and so as we were preparing this, we thought about, the history of student development theory, and it was interesting that we were talking about the colonial era and how this field of higher education can trace its roots all the way back to the colonial era. And then we were like, when you think about that in contrast to the timeline of the collegiate recovery era, if we want to call it that, I think the real era for collegiate recovery happens in the 2000s, but it's just so much smaller. And so the timeline for collegiate recovery, and we'll talk a lot more about the theories that have kind of shaped both of these fields in a little bit, but the timeline for collegiate recovery is much shorter, right? Early on, those first 3 bullet points are represented by champions on campuses who were advocating on behalf of the students on their campus to give them a recovery space, because whether it was their personal experience as a person in recovery, or if it was their training and what they've learned through education, which made them advocates for people in recovery, they saw a need and tried to fill it by creating programming and support services for students who were in recovery from a substance use disorder, because they saw the struggles those students were having. And so Brown University in 1977 with Dr. Bruce Elliott Donovan, Rutgers University in 1983 with Lisa Laitman, who is an absolute delight. I love Lisa. And then Texas Tech University with Dr. Carl Anderson, who's also wonderful as well. I never, not that Dr. Donovan isn't, I guess now I'm singling him out, but I've never had the opportunity to meet him, but I've gotten to meet the other 2. And, just these fierce and staunch advocates that were able to create these programs that have stood the test of time and are still leaders in our field today. And in 1988, Rutgers created the first recovery residence hall. And this was based off of Lisa Laitman advocating for safe housing for students in recovery. And we know today how important housing is for recovery support services and individuals who are seeking recovery. And then in 1997, Augsburg University would create its own housing-focused recovery program. And they were proud to boast about having such a large program, and pointed at their students' high GPAs and high and low return to use and high abstinence rates as keys to success for their model. But even before that, I think one of the I missed the point before that. Even before that, I think one of the first signs that the nation, right, folks outside of the individual schools who are doing this work, were starting to take notice, and we're looking with a sense of curiosity and inquisitiveness of what is happening on these campuses. Is there's actually an article that you can find if you Google recovery in the dorm at Rutgers University. It's still available online, where they talked about the recovery residence halls at Rutgers and the work, again, that Lisa Laitman was doing there. And in 2001, not through 2022, it's supposed to be through 2002. That must have been like a, just a auto thing. But in 2001, Rutgers, TTU, and Augsburg actually came together and did a collaborative presentation for the first time at a national conference. It was labeled Recovery as a Prevention Technology. And so without having had conversations with the 3 individuals who did this presentation together. I even think at that, like just reading the title at that time, it was still about this this sense of needing to justify our program, justify the work that we do, and trying to coin recovery as a prevention technology rather than what it is. It's not prevention. It lives on a continuum with prevention, but trying to find space in higher education where we often have these sense of, you know, everybody's fighting for airtime, right? And so the following year after that, ARS was created, which is the Association of Recovery Schools, which is still an organization today. At the time, it was a mix of both the collegiate recovery programs and recovery high schools, and they would stay as one organization for some time until, I believe, 2010, when they would split, and that's when ARHE, as we know it today, was created, as they decided that it made more sense for there to be two organizations focusing on two separate fields, which were vastly different, even though there's still great reciprocation between the two today. And so when the era of collegiate recovery, in my opinion, officially begins is in 2005, when Texas Tech would receive a grant from the Department of Education and SAMHSA and create they would create a replication model for collegiate recovery programs. And they would have the opportunity and the resources to take that model and provide technical assistance to other universities across the country who were interested in creating collegiate recovery programming. And then in 2012, that's strange. So then in 2012, Transforming Youth Recovery would create a mini grant program. And so Transforming Youth Recovery gave out, I believe it was $1 million in the way of $110,000 mini grants to universities. And so this was when we saw another big boom for collegiate recovery programs. When Transforming Youth Recovery made this funding available, we saw many more schools begin collegiate recovery programs, because what many of them lacked was, in addition to a curriculum and a design of how do we do this work, was the funding to begin doing this work. And so between 2005 and the time when Transforming Youth Recovery would begin doing their work, we saw this great mushroom where we went from 3 programs to 4 with Augsburg in 97 to, I think we had 6 or 7 around 2006, because we started adding a few more due to the replication efforts. And then by the mid 2010s, we were up to over 120 programs.
Awesome. You know, I think listening to these things again, something I think about is that, you know, nothing happens in a vacuum, right? Like if we think about how our fields progress, so much of it comes from having those like spaces outside of your own institution where you get to talk to other people who are doing different work than you, and really collaborating and coming together and finding that synergy on different campuses to kind of see what's working across the board. And so why do we talk about theory, right? Like what makes it something that is worth thinking about, right? I think, like, you know, while our presentation is pulling on student development theory and then recovery support, because that's our background, everyone here has some form of theory or knowledge that informs the work that you do on a day-to-day basis, right? And I think for us, it's just really important when we think about decisions that we make that might impact our program, that we're always looking back to say, you know, why is it that we're doing this, right? Where's this knowledge coming from? And I think, you know, what it means to act with influence to theory is to be thinking about what are our like meaning-making capacities as individuals? How are we bringing them together as a department or a program, and allowing those to create space in which we influence the different actions that we take. And I think it's important to recognize that like theory doesn't have to mean just this like a module that someone made up, or not made up, but like, you know, has some sort of method behind it. We have both formal theory, which is usually very rigorously tested. It's kind of some of those like foundational pieces, but then we also have informal theory, right? Like our sense of knowing, right? Like how we as individuals make sense of knowledge, thinking about like interpersonally, how is the way we do our work impacted by who we know and who we've gotten to connect with, and how maybe they've shared their own background and their own theories with us, as well as interpersonal, right? So thinking about how the identities that we carry as individuals impact our work, or how our identities have impacted how others have collaborated with us or not collaborated with us, and if we have seen ourselves in theories in the past or not, right? Because the reality is, and we'll get into this a little bit later, is that a lot of what we consider like foundational theory was built on research of individuals who were going to college at a time where everybody might identify as being the same cis white affluent male, right? And that's very different than who we're looking at today. And so can we map older foundational theories onto students that we're working with today or not? Or students that hold a recovery identity, right? Like how is that intersectionality a little bit different or similar in this space? But what I'm absolutely not going to do with you today is bore you on every single theory that we could talk about. But I do think we can kind of think about 4 different families that exist when we think about the theories that have kind of built the student affairs lens or space, so to speak. So I'm going to just go through those pretty briefly with y'all. You can go to the next slide if you want. Awesome. So kind of the first family, right, is psychosocial theories. And so what psychosocial theories are is they really are focusing on how an individual develops over the lifespan, right? And I think it's important to recognize too is like theories aren't something that like exists in a vacuum as well, right? So a lot of what you listen here, like I listed a few examples, right? So Chickering's 7 vectors or Erik Erikson's stages of development. A lot of these are coming from lifespan development spaces, right? And folks that kind of work in this space have kind of recognized the importance of these theories and how to map them onto the work we're already doing. So theories can come from all kinds of different spaces. I think what makes psychosocial theories like this family important to think about is it's really describing how students develop their perspectives, how they develop their knowing and understanding about society, about identity, how they evolve through conflict and crisis that they might experience. These theories are really typically are in like stages, right? So the way that they're mapped out or moduled is typically like sequential, as in you kind of work through a specific stage. There might be tasks that you have to go through or certain challenges that an individual goes through in order to get to the next stage. And so it's really that sequential phase of development, right? Of developing as a person, or you know, when we think about identity specific theories, like theories about whiteness or queer theory or things of that nature. The next kind of family or space in which we think about with theories is this cognitive structural theories. And so this really is any theory that talks about how students may think, how they develop reasoning skills, how they make meaning of their experiences, thinking about like morality or ethical development. So Kohlberg, Perry's theory of intellectual and ethical development. Again, these theories are very similar to psychosocial in the sense that they're also typically sequential or kind of move through some sort of stages of development that kind of unfold as a person grows, which I think is really indicative of where they come from, which is that lifespan development space. Awesome. And then person environment interactive theories. So I think these ones you can kind of almost think as being like those true student development theories, because they came out of the environment of a university or a collegiate space, right? And this kind of area of family of theories really focuses on how behavior is affected by the environment in which an individual is in, right? And so two really popular ones are Aston's theory of involvement and Tinto's theory of departure. And so Aston's theory of development is kind of what I have here. It's really talking about how an individual is going to come into an environment with a set of inputs, right? So characteristics that make up an individual. And then when they're in the college environment, there's going to be transformative things that may happen to an individual that might lead to different outcomes, right? So it's really talking about how the college environment itself could impact students, especially around co-curricular activities. And so speaking about like students' involvement in their schooling, about how they feel a sense of belonging and things of that nature. Tinto's is really similar. It's about this idea of departure, and it's really looking at why a student might exit a university or a space, be it about, if they experience any sort of difficulties or inability to find that sense of belonging, right? So it's how are we integrating all of the students' experiences so that they feel a sense of self and a sense of belonging to the system of higher education, and that they don't, and they decide to persist instead of deciding to depart the university before they've graduated. I feel like I'm going through like 2 years of my master's program in 10 minutes, y'all. So bear with me. And then the final kind of family that we talk about is humanistic or existential theories. And really, these are theories that help folks that work with students do more of that counseling or advising space. They're really designed to help folks think about healthy living or promote health and well-being, which, being in the recovery space is really important as well. And so that can be anything from, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think we've all kind of heard of this one of, students have essential needs that need to be met in order to be able to think about some of these other things that are really important to their growth. Yeah, that is all I have on that one. And so we're curious if folks want to throw in a chat, these are just a smattering of different theories, but again, Ahmed and I really want to create a little bit of conversation in the chat, and we're curious, like, what are theories that you might utilize in your work with student populations during your campus? And again, it could be like a formal theory, but it can also just be like your sense of knowing and the why behind how you do your work.
Yeah, and while they're doing that, Mackenzie, I think one of the some of the really large conversations that we generally have around theory is that that it takes a little bit of, and you kind of talked about it when you talked about when you were going through the timeline about what is happening in today's higher education field, is that they're taking all these old theories and they're applying them to these different populations as access to higher education continues to be afforded to more and more people in different walks of life. And so I think one of the things that we often talk about is how unique the population that we work with in collegiate recovery programs are, and how for us it sometimes takes the theory to practice part of the work takes a little bit of ingenuity of understanding the population we work with, and understanding that not every theory that we are reading and learning about and the lenses that they create for us is going to apply, is going to be like a perfect application to the students we're working with, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And especially like thinking about some of those psychosocial theories, right? Like they're set up to be in these stages. And I think something that we talk about a lot, right, is like people are messy, like they don't work through stages. Typically there's a lot of back and forth and a lot of unique things happening in each individual's life. So the idea of working from theory to practice isn't about trying to take each student that walks into your door and trying to map them onto a theory. It's instead taking pieces of theory that could help support the student where they're at the moment. At least that's how I use it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And how true is that with the collegiate recovery population about if it's about going through stages, how a return to use or some other sort of setback can absolutely put them back a stage if it's impactful enough and it lasts long enough, and a lot of the work that they've done and the support systems that they've created are kind of undone because of that change in their life, right? And so absolutely, it's definitely not a linear path for most college students. Yeah, that's great. And I also think I love I also think it's important to talk about the idea that there's no one right or wrong theory to doing the work. It's more about learning, how do I take what I've learned through my education and what I know anecdotally through my practice, and how do I apply that to any given situation. I think the problem that we can run into when we think about theory is trying to cookie cutter one theory onto every student's situation in every student's life, and how much trouble we can run into that. And so like, we're not here to say that any one theory is the right theory, but instead to just have a conversation about what is, like, how do we as a field begin to think about the theoretical lens that we want to move forward with, and how we are going to continue to design programs and collegiate recovery programs and services across the country.
Yeah.
And so let's talk a little bit about collegiate recovery theory. And so this is definitely, again, not 500 years of history here. And it's also less, there are less people who have been as influential in the collegiate recovery theory as there are in the higher education theory. And so again, most of this isn't about, it's more about just reviewing the history than saying that this one group of people were more instrumental than this group, and things of that nature. And so when it comes to collegiate recovery research, and this is according to an article, a literature research article that I'd encourage you all to read, that was done by Austin Brown, Robert Ashford, Ann Heller, Jason Whitney, and Dr. Tom Kimball. And so it said that early iterations of research focused on students versus programs. And so what the reason for that was because at the time we were still trying to define the group of students that had not been, that was not visible to staff and leadership on campuses, right? I think that the higher education, I'm never surprised when you are talking with somebody, especially at a university, that have not went down the road of developing collegiate recovery programs, or thought much about the need for these types of programs, how often you'll talk to somebody and the idea that college students can have a substance use disorder seems bewildering, right? And so early research was just kind of uncovering this hidden population on campus, and was pointing out that these people are first underserved, but that they possess special skills and potential, but they're also facing unique barriers to their success, and for some of them to their ability to be okay and to thrive and even to live, depending on the severity of their substance use. And so later research was almost entirely contributed by researchers at Texas Tech for a long time, right? And so Texas Tech University, I talked about it earlier, Dr. Carl Anderson did a fantastic job of creating that program, but at some point after he retired, Dr. Kitty Harris, who is a absolute giant in this field as well, would take over at Texas Tech, and was extremely talented researcher and did a really fantastic job of fundraising. And so they were just able to create bridges and develop partnerships with key stakeholders. And because of that, Texas Tech began to contribute research to the collegiate recovery field at a very, very significant rate. And, you know, a lot of the research that many of us use to justify our collegiate recovery programs on our campus, right? And so it was used to provide rationale for the program, for creating programs and for existing programs. And it also quantified the experiences of the students in those programs, right? It was able to show us that, yes, these programs are effective, and this is what the students are saying it is providing to them and why it's important for them in their academic journey. And it also assessed the needs of the students in recovery to identify what are some things that we're not doing that we can be doing, or what are some of the unmet needs that these students are still facing. But again, you know, big shout out to Texas Tech. And I guess maybe I should also say that I am an alum of Texas Tech, but there is no bias here. It's pretty well marked that Texas Tech, you know, in the early 2000s and the early 2010s was really putting out a lot of research with a lot of very talented researchers there under the direction and guidance of Dr. Kitty Harris. And so eventually they would create the replication model, which if you've ever started a collegiate recovery program, I am absolutely sure, and if you haven't, I want to know who you were talking to about creating it, that you would have read this model, because it's so foundational to the field and the work that we do. And so this replication model was supported by SAMHSA and the Department of Education, and it's still used by schools today when they create collegiate recovery programs. And again, it was this plus the TYR grants that would come in 2012 that we saw this explosion of collegiate recovery programs going from a handful to now over 150 across the country. And so, yeah, again, just to, this is the same thing that we saw earlier. I just wanted to remind us of, you know, this colonial era, long history of research of a growing field that didn't just pop up overnight. Compared to a field in collegiate recovery, which didn't pop up overnight either, but really a lot of the significant work in it is not even 20 years old yet, right? A lot of the work that has led from our field, the reason why Ohio State has a collegiate recovery program, a lot of that work only happened in the early 2000s. And so because of that, the underlying theories that define collegiate recovery and the approach to the work with students is less it's less formal than you with higher education, right? And so for me, when I think about this, looking back at the curriculum that Texas Tech created is one of the first places to start when we think about what research, what impact, like what curriculum, what design impacts the way collegiate recovery programs serve students the most. And so one of the reasons it was so heavily utilized is because of it's so impactful was because of its heavy utilization. It's helped universities across the country provide justification for their resources to create their own collegiate recovery programs. I think everybody in here has used that formula in the second workbook, I believe it is, that helps you to learn exactly how many students are in recovery on your campus when they were making their pitch to their leadership for their collegiate recovery community. And based on this curriculum, it suggested that for student support specifically, social support theory was the theory that that we should use when supporting students in recovery. So that was the theory that it called out. And so social support theories are, it's really similar to what Mackenzie described earlier. It's more of a family of theories. The one that is called out in the collegiate recovery community curriculum specifically is Salzer's social support theory. And so Salzer's is a Dr. Salzer, I believe, is a professor at in Philadelphia now. There's so many schools, and I'm not gonna say the right one, but huge theorist and researcher on behavioral behavior, and so has contributed a lot of work, especially with his model for social support theories. And so these theories, this family of theories derives from criminology, right? And so these are basically, this theory started by thinking of how can we help stop people who are committing deviant behaviors, right? So the aim was to decrease deviancy. And so The theory has been adapted though, because it was shown that social supports and connecting people with that type of support was important, and it was helpful in creating behavior change. And so now there are many social, behavioral, medical, and nursing disciplines that have either modified social support theory to fit their work that they do, or are using some of the still basic tenets of social support theory. And so what social support theory basically says is that there are 5 types of support. There's emotional support, which is having someone to confide in, helping you with your self-esteem, reassuring you when things are difficult, having healthy attachments to individuals, and having healthy intimacy. Instrumental support is it's the more tangible stuff, right? It's the services, having money, right? It's the scholarships that we're giving out. It's the academic advising that some collegiate recovery programs offer. It's transportation when you need it. There's informational support, which is more guidance, right? Having the mentorship that you might need, having somebody to help you with problem solving. Again, pretty much advising and coaching, right? So it's also sometimes can be accountability. A lot of the research early on showed that collegiate recovery, one of the most important things collegiate recovery programs could provide to students was accountability, because a lot of students early in recovery need accountability. Then there's companionship. It's belonging, socializing, feeling connected to others. And then validation, which can be just positive feedback from your peers, from staff, from trusted staff members. The ability to connect and create relationships with staff is something that is also something that I believe Chickerington talks about in a lot of the higher education theory as well. And so one of the interesting things about the social support theories is how much research shows that it's actual and perceived social support that create the protective factors for individuals, right? So it's a lot of it is about students feeling as if somebody cares, feeling as if they know where to go if they have a problem, feeling as if they get into a jam, there will be somebody there to help them, right? And so a lot of times it's just reassuring students that people care about them and giving them somewhere to feel connected to. And so I think also, again, thinking about ARHE, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the guidelines that ARHE created. And so ARHE's guidelines, I won't go through all 8 of them, because again, if you've begun this work, I'm sure that you've read the guidelines. If you are thinking about creating a collegiate recovery program, and being here today was a jumping off point for you, the Texas Tech curriculum is definitely something that I would suggest for you to read, and it's a free open source on the internet, and ARHE guidelines as well. And for me, I hadn't dusted off my Texas Tech curriculum in a really long time, because I've been at Ohio State for 8 years. Our collegiate recovery programs much past the initial, the beginning stages. But even still, reading it again was fascinating. And when I was preparing for this presentation, and so I'd suggest that all of you go reread it. And it's really, for me, it was the letter from Dr. Harris in the introduction that really was, I don't know, reaffirming why I am a professional in the collegiate recovery space. And so these guidelines are a culmination of collegiate recovery professionals' experiences. There was individuals coming together and deciding that all of our collegiate recovery programs are stronger together than they are separate, and working together and sharing their collective experiences to help new schools develop collegiate recovery programs in the future. And so that's what this is. This is a culmination of a little bit of research done at Texas Tech, mostly mixed with some anecdotal experience of a lot of really wonderful staff members who have been helping to push this field forward for many years. And so many of these recommendations are were based off of a lot of the work done at Texas Tech, who the staff there played an integral role in creating ARHE and creating ARS, and and influencing the field.
And then I think some of the things I think about and what you shared was that, I think when we think about theory, it's important to recognize that like just because a theory might be more formalized or have a longer career than other theories that are just started doesn't mean one's like better or worse than any other, right? I think there's so much value in both and utilizing things. And when I think about theory, I think a lot about like how we talk about language, right? And how being able to speak the language of different people is so important in these spaces, and what theory can sometimes help us to do, just like how Texas Tech, when they were putting things together for like that seminal piece, is like they had to go and talk to other constituents and show why this was important. And that probably meant using theories that were used by, higher ed professionals or university presidents or things like that. So another great use of theory is just recognizing who it is you're talking to and what is the language that they speak and what are the overlaps. Because when you were talking about social support theories, like I can clearly think about parallels to theories that I've learned from a higher ed lens that are getting to very similar things, just different. I might not have heard of it before this role because of what my background is and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, I had been in the field of collegiate recovery I was a student. I'd worked in multiple roles before I started working with you, who was somebody who was like, I'm not saying this in a negative way, but really loved higher education and student development theory. And even working with a colleague, my entire perspective has changed on the approach to this work because of the people who surround me, right? And how important it is that it's not my theory that you should be working by, right? But how you influence the way I perceive student situations because we work closely together, and I'm sure vice versa for you as well. And so absolutely, I think that it's one of the things that is tried and true about being a professional and in life is if we're not continuing to grow and evolve as practitioners, then this field is going to leave us behind because the students' needs and the challenges they face are going to continue to grow and evolve, and we need to be learning from each other for sure. And so somebody had asked me to post, thank you, Anthony, the Texas Tech replication model. And so that's where you can get it. Again, it's a free open source model that I would definitely advise you to check out. And so using theory and work. Yeah, I don't have much to add there. I'm going to just jump to this next one. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, no, I think this slide is getting to what we were just talking about, right? Of like theories about like informing each other, and there's no one right or wrong theory. There's no a lot of what our work and the idea of theory to practice for me has always been like Frankensteining theories from lots of different spaces, and one thing that I always like to hold true is that a lot of the theories that I learned in my program, while incredibly great and things that I can see value in using on a day-to-day basis, the folks in which those theories were based on are not inclusive of the population of students that now exists in a collegiate environment or a collegiate recovery environment, right? And so again, this is a more of that Frankensteining too. So there was a really great idea and book brought forth by John Dugan in 2017, and John Dugan focuses a lot on leadership theory, which I think we think highly of cultivating good leaders here at Ohio State. But talking about these critical perspectives of some of these theories, right? And while this is more leaning towards leadership theory, I think it can be used across the board, right? Of like, how are we looking at theory, deconstructing it, right? Seeing again, what are some of those maybe holes or things that are maybe perpetuating hurt or harm potentially. And then how do we also create spaces of recognizing that just because a theory might have not been inclusive of everyone, that there's still some really good things that can happen from applying that theory, right? And so John Dugan talks a lot about this idea of like having tools for deconstruction and reconstruction. And I have them listed here, and a lot of it goes through like questioning, right? Like, what are the core beliefs of this theory, and like what are we positioning as being the normal piece, right? Like, when we're thinking about stages, we're thinking that end stage must be like what we're normalizing, right? And is that reality for everyone, or is it reality for whatever small group was being researched in that moment? Thinking about the flow of power, or thinking about commodification, right? Like, what systems are theories attending to, right? Like, are we making sure that we're not dehumanizing people? Are we making sure that what we're studying is making sense from a humanistic level? Are we acknowledging systems at play that may want us to be blind to certain things, right? Because the society we live in is capitalism, things of that nature. But then again, on the other side, we've got these tools of reconstruction, which is about naming these things, right? Because I think if we name it, we can pull in other things and other theories and other seminal research that can really help us support students from the individual level, attending to some of those power pieces, right? And finding those convergences of interest, right? So that the work that we're doing is pulling everybody up with us, right? And not oppressing people, and it's not causing harm, because instead we're building those coalitions and folks and bringing everyone to the table, and really cultivating that agency, right? Like making sure that folks have a sense of autonomy and purpose in the work that we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, again, just wanting to hear from you all, what are some of the theories you guys are utilizing in your practice of recovery supports? So what are the approaches that you take to supporting students in recovery? What are some of the underpinnings of those approaches? And what is some of the, thought behind your approach to program design, things of that nature? And so please just share it in the chat, because I think one of the most important things for us is our recognition that we are always happy to share our beliefs and thoughts on these topics, but there are so many wonderful practitioners across the country who, when you all are sharing your thoughts and your beliefs, we're going to learn from them as well. And so please share with us and share with the rest of the chat some of the approaches that you all are taking.
The theory nerd in me is loving all these that are already being thrown in there. I
Yeah,
know,
those are
just to
good.
be conscious of time too, like, should we talk about how we started thinking about like a theoretical model for us?
Yeah. What you mean next?
Yeah, just
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to see some of them before we
Oh,
changed. Yeah,
sorry.
Bronze Runners, I love it. Yeah, me and Mackenzie love talking about theory. We would rather talk about things at a 10,000 foot level than a 10-foot level, and so we're all constantly having these conversations and ending up having to work at home because we don't get anything done, because we'd rather debate and be philosophers instead. And so, but that's okay though. I love that part of our job. And so now we just want to talk a little bit about our theoretical lens and how we created it for our team. And so one of the things that I try to be intentional to do when working with Mackenzie, and we have another one of our colleagues, is to understand, first of all, when you're trying to create a team, like for instance, if my training is in that of social work and alcohol and other drugs and nonprofit management, right? That's where my educational background comes from. And I think social workers are fantastic. I love the field of social work. It has helped me become the practitioner I am today. But the last thing, as somebody who is a hiring manager, who is asked to lead a group of people, that I need to be doing is only hiring social workers who are going to come in and see things the way that I see them, and are not going to be able to challenge me when my theoretical lens or the theoretical underpinnings that I approach the work from are either falling short or are not applicable in situations, or are not missing the entire holistic view of the situation, right? And so for me, I remember, I knew Mackenzie before she took this job, and it was just the timing was perfect. And I knew that having somebody who was as grounded in student development theory as she is was something that we needed to add to our team. And so I was excited when she came to work here at Ohio State. And we've had other public health. We usually have had a public health expert with us on our team as well. And so it's about taking these different theories and approaches and combining them. And so for us, one of the practices that we like to do is teach each other about the theories that we see as our theoretical, kind of almost like making our own manual of this is Ahmed and this is how he approaches the work based off of what he's learned and what his belief system is theoretically, and this is Mackenzie's and this is our colleagues. And so here is teaching each other about those theories, learning from each other. At a one-time event, I believe we did like a half day kind of deal to go through this practice that I'm kind of describing, but then also to continue to learn, right? And so, like I said, I've learned so much from the people I work with, and it's completely reshaped not only my view to supporting students, but also even how I take the theory that I have, that I learned, that I believe deeply in, and apply it to practice, because two theories aren't always theories oftentimes have great synergies and meld into each other beautifully. And so this is kind of what we did. So we listed our individual theories, right? So if we had driving theories, what would they be? And so we have a colleague who will go unnamed that was a part of this conversation as well. And so Mackenzie listed some of the theories that she loves: the thriving quotient by Schreiner, which is amazing; transition theory by Schlossberg, which is terrific; self-authorship by Baxter and Magadola; and then the social ecological model. And for me, it was humanistic theory, crisis intervention models, solution focused theory, recovery capital, and harm reduction theory. And then our colleague brought systems theory and empowerment theory, because they were classic preventionists. And so they brought some prevention theory into the mix that was really just a wonderful complement to the group. And so after we kind of taught each other about these and talked about them, after we talked about the intersections that they had together and why they were so, where there was synergy between them and where there was overlap, we kind of came up with our theory as a team, right? So this is our theoretical lens for the AOD team at Ohio State. And so for us, it was important to utilize evidence, formal and informal, and to utilize a strategic prevention framework, right? Some sort of way to design and guide the work that we do and make sure that it's grounded in theory and scientific methods, right? So we're not out here just doing things all willy-nilly, right? And so also we believe that individuals have the capacity to thrive if they're given the resources they need. We believe that we need, as a part of our work is focusing on the systems and the entire ecological model, and not just addressing individual behaviors. And specific to recovery, we started doing that in 2015 when we created the first Collegiate Recovery Ally training, and we continue to do that work. And we also do policy work on our campus as well. Having a growth mindset when solution-focused approaches, we strongly believe in positive psychology and solution-focused approaches to working with students and helping students understand that they have everything within them to create the change in life that they want. Having cultural humility to recognize how systems impact certain groups and individuals, and how it's our responsibility to help them navigate those systems if and how we can. And sometimes we can't, and we need to connect them with individuals who can. And then focusing on an individual's well-being and helping them thrive, versus solely addressing their substance use. Again, this holistic approach to the work. And a lot of this for us is based in the conversation that continues to happen between us and across the country with harm reduction, and what is our responsibility as people who work in a recovery space to somebody who doesn't identify as abstinence-based recovery being the best path forward for them. Well, we still have a responsibility to serve them. And so we need to figure out how we're going to do that. Did you have anything to add there?
No, just that I thought it was a great exercise for any team to do, right? Because I learned so much, and my lens has really pivotally changed because of conversations like this.
Yeah, for sure. And so we definitely hope that if there's any questions, that we'd love to answer them. Yeah, so definitely saw some of the wonderful theories in there. Jeff, yeah, it looks like an interesting read. We'll have to check that out. I think that lots of yeah, that makes sense that a lot of the folks that that have been, that have put out research and things like that probably have some skeletons in their closet, absolutely. But Mackenzie, did you have anything else to add? I don't think we have. Do we have any questions? Yeah, we have a couple. So what do you do if you work in an institution where leadership might not see the value in investing in this? Yeah, I think that the answer to that is that you need to learn to speak their language. And so they may not see the value in a program that serves small numbers of students, but they might see the value in the money that you can save them by helping these students to avoid crisis, avoid being separated from the university, and for completing and finishing graduation. And again, I think that that's one of the areas where the Texas Tech curriculum is super beneficial, because it has formulas, and it has ways to have this conversation with leadership in a way which is going to speak their language when we think about dollars, retention, graduation rates, GPAs, and things of that nature. And are there any suggested staffing models associated with collegiate recovery programs? Dedicated AOD staff, mental health professionals, peer support professionals. I think that's a great question. I don't know that there's any one right answer to that. Again, going back to the collegiate recovery curriculum, they suggested one staff person for every 25 students. And I'd say that's the closest as we've got as far as a suggested staffing model. It was more of a suggested staffing ratio. And so I think that a lot of those questions are answered based off of where your collegiate recovery program is housed. So for instance, we're in the Student Wellness Center. And because we're in the Student Wellness Center, we have a great variety of people working here, and we're able to employ individuals from different different practices. If we were a program in a housing, it might make sense. It would probably still make sense for us to have somebody who understand recovery support services, but we'd also have a lot more input probably from student affairs professionals who understand residence life and housing. And there are programs that exist in counseling centers as well. And because of that, those programs are likely led by licensed clinicians and things of that nature. And so I think that the long answer, which this has become a long answer to that, is that it's often dictated by where the resources are coming from and where the program is going to be housed on your campus.
Well, thank you both so much. You did an amazing job addressing all the questions. Thank you for sharing of yourself and of your time. It's always a pleasure having the opportunity to learn from both of you. So thank you so very much. I do just have a couple of housekeeping slides I would like to share with everybody. We do have an upcoming webinar happening in October, and it is featuring Dr. Emily Baker. The session is titled Beyond the Aggregate, Amplifying Voices from the 2022 College Prescription Drug Study. Additionally, I would like to remind folks that today's session has been recorded, and you can expect to see that uploaded to our website within 3 business days. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and I hope you have a great rest of your week. Take care.